Welcome to the channel, everybody. And if you haven't subscribed, well, hit that subscribe button, will ya? Well, if you're trying to choose between a 22-250, a 243, or a 25-06, or even something similar to that, like a 6mm or 22 caliber that has a little bit more oomph than the 223 Remington, you're in the right spot, let me tell you. Now, this process that I'm going to go through is generally how I determine if I'm thinking I want a new caliber, if I need a new caliber. This is kind of the general process that I'll go through to determine that. So what sparked this video and to compare these three calibers is a friend asked me, he says, how far can I shoot a deer with a 243? He's all about deer hunting, and that's what he planned to use this gun for. So probably a good idea to know that before you purchase a gun. Anyways, just off the top of my mind, I was doing something else. I wasn't near a computer. I thought, probably about 400 yards. So I said, hey, probably about 400 yards, but tomorrow let me run some numbers and I'll tell you. And now I'll get into the criteria a little further into the video of what's an ethical distance to shoot a deer at. But like I say, I'll go through that a little later in the video. So that was my initial thoughts and how this initially came about. I first was thinking, well, he's got quite a few of these small calibers. I know he's got a 22-250 and he's got a 25-06. Those are pretty similar calibers. And I said, okay, well, let's run the numbers and see. So first off, let's take a little comparison of all three of these calibers. The 22-250 Remington cartridge. It uses a 22 caliber bullet. And just looking at the general ballistic coefficient of the bullets, if you don't know what that is, it's pretty much how much drag and wind resistance they face and how much the wind blows them around. It's a main component in determining drop and energy, as well as how much effect the wind has. And generally speaking, for most situations and calibers, the heavier the bullet, the higher the VC, and the more energy is transferred downrange. Now, the heavier the bullet, sometimes they drop a little bit more, but generally not a whole lot, surprisingly. That bullet coefficient is plays quite a significant factor. Having that heavier bullet also seems to be a lot more resistant to wind. So the 22-250 has actually a pretty wide variety of bullet weights, anywhere from about 85 grains all the way down to 30 or 40 grains. And I chose the 85 grains and the 55 grains. And another thing to consider when determining what bullet weights to compare is you're going to need to look at your barrel twist rate, because that is going to determine what type and weight of bullet you'll be able to shoot out of that particular barrel. Looking at the 22-250, on the heavy side I put the 85 grain, on the lighter side I put a 55 grain bullet. 55 grain bullet is a very common weight of a bullet for an AR-15 for a 223 or a 5.56 caliber. And to give you a kind of an idea of what we're dealing with here. So with that 55 grain bullet, the muzzle velocity is 3,600 feet per second. That thing is zipping. When we're looking at the energy here, out of the muzzle, you've got 1560 foot-pounds energy, which is pretty good. Now, in order to shoot a mule deer, I think you probably want about 1,000, maybe 900 to 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. Now this is for a mule deer. Keep that in mind. A whitetail, maybe you won't need as much. But I tend to err on this side of caution when dealing with these types of things. And another thing to watch out for is the wind. How much does wind affect the bullet? Because if you're out in the hills out there hunting, you may not have the time to calculate the wind. But keep in mind, with these small bullets, wind definitely does play a role. We go to the 85 grain bullet. As you can see, it has a much higher ballistic coefficient, so that's good. So it should carry its energy a lot further. And we look at that. We look at 400 yards at 22, 250. It's got almost 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. 500, it's got 800, almost 850. And then we move over to the 55 grain, and it only has 566 at 400 and 422 at 500. So big difference there, and that's where you're going to want to look at your barrel twist. You want to make sure that it's going to be accommodating these 85 grain bullets. So now we'll move over to the 243. The 243 uses a 6 millimeter bullet. Grain weight is a big factor here. Now on the heavy end of the scale, you've got 105 grains, and that's going about 2,900 feet per second. And then on the lower end of the scale, you've got about 80 grains. Now you can shoot lighter bullets, but I didn't think we would want to go lower than 80 grains for this application. And we've got 80 grains, which is about shooting about 3,300 feet per second. So let's move down to about the 400 and 500 ranges. We've got 400 yards with the 105 grain bullet. We've got plenty of energy. We've got 1,180. Move to 500, we've still got over 1,000. We've got 10,028. And at 600, we've got almost 900. Now we compare that to the 80 grain at 400. We've only got 850. The 500s, we only got 680. And at 600, we have 540. So depending upon the wind, you could probably shoot a deer at 600 yards. Depending upon the wind, we're going to have to look at the wind on that. Now, another thing to consider is shooting this far, and this has to do with the wind, is just because you've got the energy and everything, and it says you can shoot that far based on that information, you've got to be able to hit what you're aiming at. With that small of a bullet, you've tested out at that yardage, and if you can't consistently be hitting the roughly 4 to 6 inch bullseye with that small of a bullet, then I wouldn't shoot that at a deer at that range. And if it was a bigger bullet, I would say you could broaden that diameter or that range that you could hit in. But with that small of a bullet, I would really say you would want to hit very close to the heart, at least double lung, just because that bullet doesn't have as much mass as a heavier bullet. But if you poke a deer in the heart, no matter what caliber you're using, it's going to die. Enough of that, let's go to 25-06. The 25-06 uses some heavier bullets, as we can see, but the ballistic coefficient really is not that great. And I researched this a little bit more after a quick search, and it seemed to be true. Some diameter bullets just don't have the same ballistic coefficient ability as others. 6 millimeter and 22 caliber bullets have pretty good ballistic coefficients, but you see here we've got a heavier bullet and it's in a slightly larger caliber, and it's not such a great ballistic coefficient, but you go up to the 6.5 millimeter, which is slightly larger than that 25 caliber that the 25-06 shoots, and it's great ballistic coefficient. So that's just one thing you've got to consider and look at before purchasing a caliber, in my opinion. Anyway, BCs are low, and they're about the same for the 120 and the 100 grainers. Anyway, we go to 120 grains, we're pushing 2,900 feet per second, and out to 400 yards we've got 1,090, out to 500 yards we've got 900, almost 900, and with the 100 grain bullet we've got 400, we've got over 1,100, And 500, we've got 943. So just looking off these numbers, we can see that the 243 definitely has the advantage, even with lighter bullets than the 25-06. And the reason is because the ballistic coefficient, really. You've got a 105 grain bullet out of the 243 Winchester going 2,900 feet per second. And you've got a heavier bullet, a 120 grain bullet out of the 25-06 going the same speed, but you've got a heavier bullet. But that heavier bullet has a not as good ballistic coefficient. And we can see the 243 Winchester's ballistics with the bullet that has a 54 ballistic coefficient. It's got much better results downrange. And initially, out to 200 yards, the 25-06 does have more velocity. But once you get past 200 yards, the 243 just takes over. Now that we've determined that the 243 Winchester, between all these cartridges, it's probably going to perform the best for the application that we're looking at. Let's check out the wind and see if the wind's going to be an issue. Now, for wind purposes, when I'm getting these charts together, I go with a 1 mile per hour wind at 90 degrees because it's very easy to multiply that depending on the wind speed. So we were saying that you could probably shoot a deer out to 600 yards as long as the wind behaved. Now the wind drift on this chart for the 243 Winchester, as I said, 1 mile per hour, and it's in inches. So if we've got a 1 mile per hour wind and it's coming straight across us at 90 degrees, that's 2 inches. That's 500, 600 yards. Not a big deal. But that, you've got to remember, that is a speed of 1 mile per hour. That's like a very slight breeze. You go to 10 mile per hour wind, which is a decent amount of wind, but not crazy. You've got to times that 2 by 10, because it's 10 times the speed. And that's 20 inches. 20 inches at 600 yards, that's quite a bit. That's almost 2 feet. And you've got to be able to account for that and to calculate that in the heat of the moment. That's pushing it. So for myself, in my opinion, I don't think I would shoot a deer past 400 yards in the wind. Now, that being said, that's all going to be determined on the angle. If the wind angle is coming right at me or right at my back or just slightly off to an angle, then yeah, 600 yard shot would probably be fine. But if it's coming 90 degrees or close to it and it's really gusty, it's going to be pretty difficult to calculate there right on the fly, and you've only got one shot. So, and you've got to hit that, in my opinion, that 6-inch diameter ring right around the heart. So I just personally, I wouldn't. If it was 10 miles per hour, I would not take that shot at either 400 or 500 yards. 400 yards and closer, you're probably pretty good too, and you could calculate that 10 inches pretty easily. So there you go. That's kind of what I do for all calibers that I'm thinking about buying, to see if they're worth it, to see if I have a caliber that's very similar, or to see if there's a caliber that would work better for the purpose I'm thinking of. Anyways, hopefully that was helpful to you. Now remember, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Like, more than 90% of you are viewing and they're not subscribing, and it probably doesn't seem like a big deal to you, and I completely understand, but just know that it is a big deal to me, and it just those subscribers really do help me out. So I appreciate it. Hey, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want me to compare any more calibers, I know, weird, but I kind of like doing this, diving into numbers and looking into them number-wise before looking at other dimensions of the caliber. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.